Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and do some examples solving by square roots. So looking at this first one, I know I can solve by square roots because I do not have my x term, my bx term. I say I have my x squared, I have just a number, but I don't have my x term. So that means I can solve by square roots. If I did have the x term, I couldn't solve it using this method. And so when solving this, I'm going to treat it just like I would if this were a normal equation. So let's say if it was 3x minus 27 equals 0, and you want to get x by itself. I'm going to first add 27 to both sides. And then divide both sides by 3. But now instead of being done here, I need to get rid of that squared term. So just like we talked about in the last video, to do that, to undo the square, I am going to take the square root of both sides. So when I take the square root of x squared, I end up with just x. So those end up canceling each other out. And then I want to take the square root of 9, and you can do that on Desmos. If you go to this keypad, there is a square root button right here. And I see that the square root of 9 is 3. But just like I talked in the last video, I have really positive and negative 3 that are my solutions. And so if I were to ask you to write this as an ordered pair, that would mean that my answers are 3, 0, and negative 3, 0. And we can see that when we graph it. So if I were to go ahead and graph this, I see that where my graph crosses the x-axis, those are my solutions. Okay, looking at this next one, I'm going to first subtract 11 from both sides. And then divide both sides by negative 5. And then get x squared equals negative 1. And then I'm going to try and take the square root. However, I have a problem. I'm trying to take the square root of a negative number, and I can't do that. They have to be positive. So whenever that happens, this is just going to be no solution. And so if you were to graph this, basically this graph would not cross the x-axis. Another way you can catch yourself on that is if I go over to Desmos and try to take the square root of negative 1, it's going to tell you it's undefined. So if you see that, that means no solution. Okay, go ahead and pause the video. I want you to try and do number 3. Okay, so the answers that you should have gotten here were positive and negative 5. And so I just write that as plus or minus 5. Okay, this one looks a little bit different. I have parentheses now that's all squared. But that's okay. You're still going to be doing this pretty much the same thing. So to get rid of that square term, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And so those cancel, so I just have x minus 1 is equal to, when I take the square root of 25, again, that's going to be plus or minus 5. Now to get x by itself, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And so I have x is equal to 1 plus or minus 5. And now this step's really similar to when we're doing the quadratic formula and we break this off into 2 different pieces. We're going to do the same thing here. So this 1 plus or minus 5 really just means I have 1 plus 5 or I have 1 minus 5. And so when I add those, I get 1 plus 5 is 6, 1 minus 5 is negative 4. Number 5 is really similar. To get rid of that squared term, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. You notice I'm doing this because I want to get rid of that square there. So when I do that, those cancel and I end up with just x plus 7 is equal to, square root of 0 is just going to be 0 because 0 can't really be negative, so you don't need to put the plus or minus there. Now I'll subtract 7 from both sides. And I get x is equal to negative 7. So you notice for this one I only end up with one answer. That's because this graph only crosses the x-axis at negative 7, 0. And so if I type that into here, you see I only have the one solution because it only touches there. Now this last one looks a little bit different. I now have this 4 in front. So you'll want to treat this just like if it was 4x squared equals 64 and divide both sides by 4 first before you take the square root. So I'm going to divide by 4. So I have x minus 3 squared is equal to 16. And then now from here I can go ahead and take the square root. The squared term needs to be completely by itself before you can take the square root. Square root of 16, if I come over to Desmos again, I see that is going to be 4. But whenever I take the square root, I always need to put a plus or minus in front of it, every time. Then add 3 to both sides. And then break this off. So I really have 3 plus 4, 3 minus 4, 3 plus 4 is 7, 3 minus 4 is negative